Hello. Now let's get some hints for our project and really put a little closure on chapter 2. So first you might think, well, how am I supposed to know how to do these projects? Well, that's a very good question. At this point in your programming career, you probably can't just sit down and write a program out of your head. Instead, you will try to read the project requirements and then in the textbook look for some samples of code that are going to be close to what you need, and then you'll modify those. So it's not that programming is supposed to be copying others' code, but at this point in time, you don't have enough samples in your own head to be able to do that. So let's take a look at the first project. All right, write a program that reads the subtotal and the gratuity rate and computes the gratuity and total. And so the user is going to enter some numbers, and then we're going to display the gratuity is this much and the total is this much. And so this is a very common calculation that people try to do in their head. If the user enters 10, for the subtotal, 15% will be gratuity rate. Right, you're at the restaurant, you try to figure out how much you need to give for gratuity or tip. So when we read through this, there's a couple of things. One is we're going to collect input from the user, and next we're going to display the actual numbers. And as you may imagine, the displaying of the numbers it will include a little bit of calculation, and then we display the numbers. But first, let's go ahead and play with some of the sample code that we had in this chapter. And I'm going to skip to another window here. So notice that in this chapter, we've learned so far that you can collect input from the end user with the input function. Remember the print function? That's how you display things. And then input is how you take it in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip some of this other code from an example. All right. And if we just leave it at this, okay, this is how we're going to prompt the user to enter something. Now, I can run this program and notice that it will go ahead and take my input, but at this point it doesn't do anything with it, right? But it collects it at least. So what that means is that I can put this input in a variable. And so subtotal will be the first one, and then the rate will be the next one. Now, if I run this, it'll look exactly the same because we're not doing anything with these variables yet. So let's do our first step, and we'll go ahead and say print subtotal, right? What we're doing now is we're collecting something from the end user here. We're putting it into variable, and then we're outputting it back to the screen. And so I will put 7 and then 0 for the rate, and notice that 7 is displayed. Why? Because we collected the 7 from the user, and then we put it right back to the screen so that they can see it. All right, so we're learning a little bit about how to interact with the end user. Now today, of course, end users click on things, they scroll things, and those are the events that allow us to collect feedback from them. At the beginning of our programming career here, we're going to use this command line and we're prompting the user for feedback. But Python can be used with graphical user interfaces, with web pages, so all of that can be extended later on to change how we collect the input from the user. Okay, so let's look at project 1 here and see what this code can do later. So we've collected the feedback. Now, in our project, I'm going to paste that sample code ahead again. In our project, not only do we collect the input, but also we are using this float function. Now, what does that do? Well, it allows us to have the number as a fraction. So we allow a fraction here. And that's helpful because hardly ever your restaurant total will be $10 straight. It's going to be 10, 50 cents and so forth. So what this code above does is it collects our fraction. So if we go ahead and rerun the code, we have the subtotal of maybe 10.5, and then as we display it, right, it displays 10.5. If we try to collect an integer here, right, it would only show us 10. So that's an example of how data types or numbers such as full numbers like integers or floats like fractions, and then strings and other types interact with each other. All right, so let's take a quick look at what we need to do next in our program. What we will do is we'll collect the feedback from the end user, and then we're going to do something to it. We're going to calculate that gratuity. So how do we do that? So the tip is going to be equal to however much our bill is, okay, times the rate. So in some states it's 6%, in other places it's less than that, and so that would be the rate. And then we're going to divide that by 100, because if the rate is 6, it needs to be percent, so that's why we divide by 100. And then the total that we pay is whatever was on the bill plus the tip. And then the last line simply displays that the gratuity is going to be the gratuity and then the total. Now we'll get in a moment to this display, but for now let's see if this checks out. So what we're going to do is we're going to run some sample numbers through this. $15.69 is my total, and gratuity is 15%. Now notice the way we were asked to enter that in the project is with a full number like this, right? Not 0.15, which is why we have to divide it by 100 later. And so now when we display it, it's $2.35 for the tip and $18.04 for the total. So what are we doing here in the display section? Well, we simply are using the print statement, and we're going to display the gratuity is, and then concatenate the number. And then the number is going to be gratuity times 100 and then divided by 100. And so why will we do that? So when we calculated gratuity, okay, it came out to be a floating number. Now that means that it could have been 0.5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It could have been a longer number. So here what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a number that only has 2 digits after the comma. And so we do that by getting the gratuity multiplied by 100. So we now are moving the cents forward, and then we're going to make it an integer or full number. And only after that we divide by 100. So just to demonstrate how that works, we will add an extra display here. We're going to say display gratuity before we do this formatting stage. So let's go ahead and run it. All right, and we're going to use 1569 as the total divided by 15. And so notice that the first time when we calculated gratuity here, it was 2.3535. Now, 1 cent is the least that you can pay, right? So this is not very helpful to us. So instead, what we did was we took the gratuity and multiplied it by 100. So we moved the decimal point so that the number is 235. And then we made sure that this 235 is going to be an integer and then divided by 100. So this was just a formatting trick to make it work. And you're not expected to know this. If you got this far in the program and then you go to Slack and you say, hey, I can't figure out the last part, I need a hint. That's perfectly fine, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the examples that you have in the text and then weave them into something that works like a program, so a code sample like this one. And so we can take then this program and take it back to our system and go ahead and execute it. All right, and so we have confirmation that this worked fairly well. All right, so this is program 1. I will see you soon for the next one.